Begin with a voice that sounds like a gavel. Psychology, it says, must change its subject or give up its claim to be a science. No more whispers about consciousness. No more private theaters where a solitary narrator tells us what a thought feels like. Bring me what can be seen, measured, predicted, and controlled, or take your place with the poets and preachers. The year is 1913. The city is Baltimore, and John Broadus Watson is publishing a paper with a title that sounds less like an article than a revolution: Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It. It will be called a manifesto, and it will earn the name not because it invents a method out of air, but because it has the clarity of a verdict already decided by accumulated irritation. The field has spent half a century, Watson believes, asking its questions with the wrong tools. He offers a trade. Stop trying to look into the head in order to measure a ghost. Start watching what organisms do when the world changes. Watson had read the physiology of reflexes and the new reports from Russia. He admired the way an animal could be taught to salivate to atone, and how that learning could be made to speak in drops that any lab hand could count. He had also watched with skepticism as introspectionists asked trained observers to report the contents of their consciousness while staring at patches of color or listening to tones. The reports did not agree. The methods felt noble and unreplicable. It galled him to call such work science when it could not pass the simplest test. Can another lab, without your mystique, get the same result? So Watson proposed that a scientific psychology eliminate the inner narrator from its methods and talk only of stimuli and responses, of learning and environment. The mind, if it existed at all, would be inferred from behavior, not treated as a witness with privileged access. There is a tone in his writing that still startles. It is impatient with compromise. It carries a promise that sounds like a threat if you love the old ways. Give me a dozen healthy infants and I will make them anything you like, doctor, lawyer, artist, beggar, by arranging their world with proper care. Heredity may set a range. Environment will set the tune. The line is boastful, and it is a sign of its time, when America preferred the gospel of possibility to the aristocracy of blood. Under the bravado is a wager that has proven partly right and partly wrong. We are more malleable than fatalists admit. We are less malleable than behaviorists hoped. But the hope moved a generation. If you can teach a dog to drool to a bell, perhaps you can teach a child not to fear the night, a drunk not to reach for the glass, a city not to produce its cruelties as if by habit. Watson's own experiments bent toward provocation. The most infamous is the case of the infant the papers called Little Albert. The setup is simple and brutal in its simplicity. Show the baby a white rat. No fear. Pair the sight of the rat with a sudden clanging hammer on a steel bar behind the child's head. A startle. A cry. Repeat the pairing over sessions. The rat becomes a signal for the shock of sound. Soon, the child cries at the sight of the rat alone. The fear spreads to other furry things. Rabbits, a fur coat, even a Santa mask with a white beard. The lesson is not subtle. Emotions can be conditioned. If fear can be trained into a child, perhaps it can be trained out. Though Watson himself did not pursue the unlearning. A few years later, Mary Cover Jones would help a different child, called Little Peter, reduce his fear of a rabbit by gradually pairing the rabbit's presence with treats and comfort. That work is often called the birth of behavior therapy. It put balm to Watson's sting and suggested that a science that can provoke can also heal. The Little Albert study would later be criticized on ethical and methodological grounds. No matter, its cultural impact outran its flaws. It told a story the public could remember, that a terror might be learned from the world and not bestowed by fate, that the environment can carve a groove in a nervous system that then feels inevitable. This was of a piece with a larger American mood. If behavior is built by reinforcement and punishment, then families, schools, and governments are responsible for the behaviors they induce. A science that links action to environment turns policy into a moral instrument. That hope for a rational molding of conduct would energize programs and terrify critics for decades. Watson's behaviorism did not stay in the university. His life took sharp turns. A scandal ended his academic career when his affair with a student and collaborator became public. He left Johns Hopkins and walked into advertising, a a field that hardly needed a behaviorist to know that feelings could be attached to products, but which welcomed one who could describe the process with authority. He prospered. He helped sell cigarettes to women by selling not tobacco, but independence, colors and words chosen to trigger conditioned associations with elegance and freedom. If you despise manipulation, the chapter reads as a fall from grace. If you admire applied science, it reads as proof that the principles travel. In either case, the through line is clear. Human action is responsive to cues and consequences, and those who arrange them write stories into bodies without ever writing a sentence on a page. In the academy, meanwhile, behaviorism colonized the landscape. It did not arrive alone. Edward Thorndike had already been studying how cats in puzzle boxes learn to escape by trial and error, deriving the law of effect. Actions followed by satisfying outcomes become more likely. But Watson gave the movement its banner and its zeal. Departments hired faculty who could design clean experiments with animals, draw learning curves, and write with the economy of the engineer. Theories that posited inner images or sentiments were treated like relics from a credulous age. The coin of the realm became stimulus, response, reinforcement, extinction, generalization, discrimination. If a concept could not, in principle, be tied to an operation that produced a measurable change in behavior, it was not a concept a scientist was obliged to keep. There were costs to this asceticism, and there were glories. The glories were obvious to anyone tired of reading arguments that turned on definitions and temper. Learning became something you could plot over days, alter by varying schedules of reward, break down with surgical clarity into components that could be recombined. Skinner would take this further, building chambers in which a pigeon's peck or a rat's lever press could be controlled by contingencies of reinforcement, with a precision that rivaled any physics of its day in elegance if not in equations. The costs were felt by those whose questions involved meaning. What is a promise? What is a memory? What is the sense of an insult? To a behaviorist, these were properly redescribed in terms of the histories of reinforcement attached to saying and doing. To a generation raised on James and Freud, this felt like a deflation of personhood. The argument would last half a century and split into 1,000 sub-arguments. It would in time give birth to a reconciliation, but not before it did a lot of productive damage to certainties on both sides. Watson's style did not help his opponents love him. He wrote like a prosecutor. He liked a clean fight more than a cautious truce. He was capable of a tenderness with children in his private life that would surprise readers who only knew his prose. He could be loyal to students. But in print, he was all edge. He called the introspectionists medievalists. He accused psychoanalysts of building castles from fog. He admitted no role for speculation except as a promissory note to be paid with experiments later. The effect was clarifying and alienating. Many who disagreed with him would sharpen their own methods in response. Many who agreed with him would later soften the rhetoric to allow talk of internal processes when those could be pinned to data. Behaviorism at its best became a discipline of suspicion that insisted on evidence and found it. At its worst, it became a language that could not say what human beings say in their own lives without sounding like it was translating poetry into a list of purchases. What did Watson leave that still lives when the manifestos are shelved? First, a standard of publicness. If you claim a phenomenon, show me how a stranger can arrange a world to make it appear. Second, a respect for learning as the central fact in the life of a flexible organism. We are born unfinished, and our environments finish us. Third, a toolbox that has proven more durable than any of his pronouncements. Shaping behavior by reinforcing approximations, arranging exposures to undo fears, engineering cues that elicit desired actions at the right moments. Much of modern clinical practice that avoids grand theory and instead asks what is the problem and what environment would teach a different response, bears his scent even when it swears it does not. Much of education that uses immediate informative feedback and practice over time owes him too. There is a counter-story that became irresistible by the 1950s. The world of language would not fit in the box. Children acquire grammar too swiftly and with too much inventiveness to have been conditioned only by praise and correction. The laboratory performed tricks that required the animal to form expectations, not just chains of associations. The brain, newly visible in images and recordings, looked like a machine that made models, not merely a switchboard that routed impulses. The cognitive revolution did not so much refute behaviorism as grow around it, absorbing its demand for rigor while reopening the black box to examination by methods that could survive in court. Watson did not live to see the full flowering. He had already retired to his farm, a man who had chosen his life's battles and carried them farther than anyone thought he could. There is a temptation to judge him by his excesses. He offered the world too much confidence in nurture. He downplayed the stubbornness of temperaments, the quiet force of biology. He was unkind on paper to those whose questions did not fit his lab. He took money to sell desires. All of this is true. It is also true that he cleaned the windows. The mind in the decades before him was often discussed in a haze of reverence or romance that made disagreement a matter of taste. After him, if you wanted a place in the conversation, you had to show what would change if the world were arranged differently. You had to earn your nouns by demonstrating their verbs. That demand has saved psychology from 1,000 beautiful but empty speeches. Imagine him walking into a classroom now. He would recognize the graphs that show learning curves and extinction, the careful matching of groups, the insistence on pre-registration and replication. He would be amazed and perhaps appalled at the brain images that now stand beside behavior as another public witness. He would want to know whether the inner states the new scientists measure are truly independent realities or simply more refined ways of talking about dispositions to act. He would not be wrong to ask. The best of his descendants would answer that internal processes count when they help us predict and change action more precisely than behavior alone could. The truce, in other words, is pragmatic. Talk of mind is permitted when it earns its keep. The story of little Albert ends, in most retellings, with an ellipsis. What became of the child? Did the fear fade? The archival work is murky and contested. The uncertainty is fitting. Watson taught us to leave behind the thrill of a perfect narrative when the facts will not supply one. He also taught us to try to do better next time, to build experiments that answer the obvious ethical and empirical questions their predecessors left hanging. In this way, behaviorism's hardest gift is not its theory, but its conscience. Do not be satisfied with a demonstration that shocks. Demand one that clarifies and heals. Stand for a moment by the door of a modern clinic where a therapist and a client are working on panic. The client has learned that the flutter in the chest predicts catastrophe. They have paired a normal bodily sensation with a vision of doom, and now the elevator, the grocery line, the meeting room have all become bells that ring terror into being. The therapist guides them into the elevator and stays. Nothing catastrophic happens. They repeat the ride enough times, in enough places, that the association weakens. The client learns to feel a fast heart as a cue to breathe rather than to flee. There is no sermon here about courage. There is an arrangement of the world in which courage becomes practice and then habit. If you want to know why behaviorism still lives, look at the quiet heroism of such afternoons. Now stand in a school where a teacher coached by an old literature is shaping a child's scattered attention into a sequence of small successes, immediate feedback for attempts, praise that names the effort, not the essence, tasks that grow a little harder as the student meets them. The child begins to experience themselves as an agent who can make a mark and not merely receive one. The oldest dream of behaviorism, prediction and control, has found its ethical form, neither prediction without responsibility nor control without consent, with the shared engineering of an environment in which better actions come easier, more often, until they feel like part of the self's own furniture. If you want a final scene that holds both the promise and the peril of Watson's revolution, imagine a city deciding how to reduce litter. It can pass a law and punish. It can post sermons and plead. Or it can change the contingencies by placing bins where hands need them and arranging small rewards for their use. The behaviorist bet is that the third will often do more than the first two combined. The critic's warning is that such engineering, if pursued without a parallel concern for meaning and justice, can make a place tidy without making it good. The answer is not to abandon the lever. It is to place it in a system that respects persons. Watson's fiercest opponents knew that, and so do his best heirs. He once wrote that psychology, to be a natural science, must discard all references to consciousness. It was a sentence designed to pick a fight. A century later, the fight has cooled into an agreement on ground rules more than a victory for a side. We study behavior because it is the gateway to everything else. We study internal processes when we have ways to tie them to behavior and brain. We study meaning because organisms like us live by it. We do all of this with the insistence, learned from Watson, that whatever we say must be accountable to changes in the world that others can reproduce. If behaviorism failed as a total account, it succeeded as an ethic. It made psychology public. When he died in 1958, news writers remembered the infants and the manifesto and the cigarettes. They missed, as such notices often do, the quieter inheritance. A lad notebook in which a student writes, "Increase reinforcement to every correct response for the next 5 trials, then fin to variable ratio," belongs to him as much as to anyone. So does the therapist's calendar with graded exposures penciled in over weeks. So does the city planner's map of where to put the bins. These are the afterlives of a voice that demanded we stop pretending to read minds and start arranging circumstances. The demand was never entirely fair, but it was fruitful. It keeps us honest when our love of theory gets ahead of our love of evidence. It reminds us that a claim that cannot guide an intervention is a claim still looking for its purchase. So hear the gavel again, not as a final judgment, but as the opening call to a session that is not adjourned. Bring what you can show. Measure what you change. Speak in terms another can test. Then, when the data require it, make room again for the inner life, not as a trump card, but as a partner that earns its keep by helping you predict and help. Watson's revolution, stripped of its swagger, becomes a habit of mind. That habit changed a discipline, and in changing it, helped change the lives that discipline touches. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care. Invite a response. Record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Watson's behaviorist wager. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see.
Dusty road beneath my boots again. Memories linger like a whiskey stain. Moonlight cuts across the empty plain. Your shadows fading with the pouring rain. Trace the nights we laughed by firelight. Dawn arrives to steal you from my sight. Last night goodbye, I watch you walk away. Last night goodbye, I couldn't make you stay. Desert wind carries your name across the sky. Last night goodbye. I woke alone, the campfire's cold and dead. Your saddle's empty by the trailer bed. Your laughter's gone, left silent in my head. The tumbleweeds roll over words unsaid. I pour a drink to drown this hollow pain. But even whiskey can't erase your name. Last night goodbye, I watch you walk away. Last night goodbye, I couldn't make you stay. Desert wind carries your name across the sky. Last night goodbye. I still see your silhouette beneath that moon.